So what exactly does it mean that we are made in the image of God? That's, I think, one of the issues that has been debated and has been, I don't know if people argue about it so much. I guess they do. A lot of the stuff that I've been reading over the last several days show a lot of the debate over what this means and some things. There's a whole, I kind of threw out, I had a whole section of this that was going to say what it doesn't mean, because there's a lot of things that people think it means that just is not what Scripture tells us. But in order to keep this down to a halfway timely lesson, we're just going to look at some things concerning what it does mean and how can we know that. First thing I want to look at, though, we've kind of done this in our Sunday morning adult class when we're looking at the book of Genesis. That's where this phrase is found. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 and 28, God is making a decision that let us make man in our own image. And so the idea of his image and the likeness of God, and what does that mean? Well, in Genesis, we've talked about the very first people to hear this. Remember in that study when we talk about where they were when Genesis was read for the very first time. The Israelites are standing at Mount Sinai. Moses has just received the law. And so for the very first time, they are hearing these words. And as these people hearing it, these are the Hebrew people, the Israelite people. And so the Israelites have just come out of Egypt. They were slaves for 400 years. But in Egypt, there was something that they saw every single day. There was someone who at least claimed to be made in the image of God. And that was Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the sole person who bore the image of a god in the Egyptian culture. And so they would have seen this, they would have heard this, they would have been told this, whether they believed it or not, that Pharaoh was, if not a god himself, he bore the image of a god. They believed that Pharaoh bore the image of the Ra, the sun god. And so that was something that they would have heard. And so when they hear Genesis 1, it's going to mean something different to them. They're going to hear for the very first time, you mean I have been made in the image of God? I thought only pharaohs, kings, were the ones that could be made in the image or born in the image of God. And so for the very first time, they're hearing something new. God is revealing to them what he is doing for mankind. It wasn't just the Hebrews, though, it was the Gentiles as well. Any Gentile people. Because they too, they had heard, if you were Greek, if you were Roman, if you were Persian, you've heard the same thing. You've heard that those who are kings, those who are high officials, those are the ones that bear the image of a god. So even as a Gentile, in a Gentile world, and you're hearing this for the very first time, so you're telling me that your God is saying that he created me in his image. That would have been something almost unbelievable to them because of their culture and what they believed about the Caesars and the kings of their nations. So just putting in context, the people who are hearing this for the first time, what would they hear and how would that affect them? I think that's an important part to some of this discussion of what does it mean to be made in the image of God. Well, in the image of God, let me give a kind of simplified definition or idea of what I believe from my study that God is intending by using this phrase. I believe it's God saying that I have created you to be and to do at a finite level what God is and does on an infinite level. There are things that we can do that God can do, but not like God does them. There are a lot of aspects that God created within us that allow us to do things that none of the rest of his creation can do. Where God is going to be able to do those things with all power and with all might and with all purpose and all of that, where we are not, we're limited. But we still have many of those qualities that he placed within us. And so, in a way, being created in the image of God, I don't think we don't have to stretch very far to see the picture that God's painting. When you see the image of something, when you look in a mirror, you see your own image. When God says, I'm going to create you in my image. So by being created this way, it's a way that God has created us to reflect him. To reflect the Creator within part of his creation. He didn't do that with all of his creation, just with human beings, just with us. And so when we're talking about this, a lot of times people try to describe and define being created in the image of God. Well, does it mean that because we have free will? Does it mean that they'll look at these individual characteristics and try to say that must be what being made in the image of God is? I think that's part of it. But it's a lot of things that God has done in bringing all of those things about in our life that makes us different than the rest of his creation. In the context, in Genesis chapter 1, that seems to be what God is doing. He's trying, by using this phrase, I'm going to make man in my image, he is making a very strong distinction of, I have created everything else, but there's only one thing that I'm going to create in my image. And so he is setting us apart from every other creature that he has made. It makes us very unique. Matter of fact, there are some unique things about this when we look at what is said. The idea of being made in his image, it's never said about anything else in creation. Only human beings. There's something else about us that's different than every other creature that was ever made, and that is that God breathed life into us. Now, God created everything else, and he created everything else living. Nothing else does it say that he breathed life into. Only humans. Unlike animals, mankind is not broken down into various species, or what we use a biblical term, that according to their kind, the different kinds of animals. That's never said about human beings. We are all a part of one creation in the image of God. Different. Many things that are unique. Many things that make us different. So what are some of those more specific things that separate us from the rest of creation? What makes us one that is in God's image where all the other animals and other creatures are not? Well, let's look at some specific things. Some of these may be more significant than others, but I think they all make that same point. As human beings, we are capable of speech. Found one quote by a man by the name of Steven Pinker. He's the director of MIT's Center of Cognitive Neuroscience. He is actually an evolutionist. He was in other things in his writing. When you read this, you would think, oh man, he believes in amazing design that God has done, but he doesn't. He actually tries to give justification for how, through somehow naturally, this all came about. But he says this, he says, as you're reading these words, you are taking part in one of the wonders of the natural world. That ability is language. Simply making noises with our mouths, we can reliably cause precise new combinations and ideas to arise in each other's minds. The ability comes so naturally that we are apt to forget what a miracle it is. We don't even think about it. Maybe when our children are very, very small and they're just beginning to learn to talk, and that we begin to realize how amazing it is at how they pick up on things. And then as they get older, we begin to realize, okay, they pick up on everything that we say. But this design within us for our brains to be able to compute and figure and do everything that is needed for speech, to be able to communicate like this. Now, animals communicate in different ways, but they cannot take thoughts and create new thoughts and new concepts and new ideas and develop those things and be able to express those and teach them like we can. It's something extremely unique, which is exactly something that makes God who he is. I don't remember the number of thousands of times in Scripture it says that "and God said." I believe it says it 9 times just in Genesis chapter 1. And God said. The fact that we have a God who speaks, and he made us in a way that we can do something like him that nothing else can do. We know that man is creative. God, obviously, the creator, and what he is able to do in creation, we can't do what God can. We can create in the finite as God can create in the infinite. But human beings, what do? We enjoy art. We enjoy literature, some of us. We enjoy music. That's not something that anything else, any other creature, is able to do. Now, I see videos online of animals sitting in front of a radio or a TV or something and doing whatever to music or things like that. But what's happening with them and the way that they are hearing it and enjoying it is not the same way that we are able to comprehend it. We have traveled 240,000 miles to the moon. We have manufactured artificial hearts. We've constructed computers that make billions of calculations a second. And we can go on and on and on with the creativity that God placed within us. That is something that you don't see in the rest of the world. Now, some will say, well, but animals are pretty creative. Many of the things that they do. There are a lot of creatures that make some amazing things. One of Kelly's favorites are the spiders that are outside, the spider webs that they make. And we've got some pretty big ones that are over there at our carport. And just the intricate webs that they make. They're incredible. They're beautiful. But spiders are still making webs. There's a bug zapper over there that catches thousands more bugs than that spider web ever catches. Well, why doesn't the spider figure out something better? Why doesn't it create something that's more ingenuitive, that can do that job better? Well, one, it doesn't need to. It does what it needs to do. But it doesn't have the ability to create and to go beyond the instinct that God has placed within it. Man can reason. Animals can be trained, but this training is not based on reasoning. Animals don't put multiple thoughts together to come to a conclusion. Creatures, other animals, they're trained based on reward and consequences. When you walk into the house and your dog is cowering back behind the chair because it peed on the living room rug, it's not because it's put the thoughts together of, I know that what I did was wrong, and I know that my owner does not like that, and I know that I probably should have done something different, but instead I did this, and so I know that they're not going to be happy when they get home. A dog does not do that. The dog is cowering behind the chair because the last time it peed on the rug, you hit it with a newspaper. It was a consequence. that it learned that when I do this, consequence. It's not reasoning. It's a training, it's an adapting to the consequences, the things around it. Only human beings can reason. Only human beings can communicate information to create understanding and comprehension. There's nothing else that has that ability. Now, there are all kinds of studies that are being done with chimpanzees and things like that, where they're trying to teach them sign language and to do different things. And again, there is a level in which they are beginning to understand, if I hit this button, I get this reward. If I hit these in a certain sequence, I get this reward. But there is not the cognitive ability that God gave to human beings. Man has the ability to choose right and wrong. Again, animals do not possess morality and ethics. Kind of the same example we used with the dog just a minute ago. But along with reason, something that God placed within us is the ability to determine right and wrong. We're able to make a decision on the commands that God has given. Is that a good command or not? I'm able to use a lot of these things together. I'm able to reason as I'm reading and communicating, as God is communicating with me, and I'm processing all of this information, and I'm able to do all these things all at the same time, because God, as He sets His law in front of me and He is trying to convince me this is what's best for you, He's also left it to me to reason through that, to be able to come to the decision and because I have the ability to make a choice of that's doing right or that's doing wrong. Now, in order for there to be right and wrong, there has to be a standard. There has to be a law. And so, again, in the world today, so many people think, well, I have my own law. I have my truth. You have your truth. So what might be right for me might be wrong for you, and vice versa. But we know that with God and His standard, there is one right in what God says. And God placed within us the ability to make that decision. No other creature has that. Man possesses a conscience. Something about conscience. When you violate your conscience, no matter what your conscience says is right or wrong, when you violate your conscience, the result is guilt. Once again, take the dog. In animals, they have no sense of guilt. They have reactions to those known consequences, but there is not that sense of guilt. There's not a heartfelt understanding of wrong that has been done. There's not a part of their conscience that is going to just eat away at them until they either correct it, or some people will find a way to justify that their wrongdoing was okay in corrupting their conscience. Man can experience emotions that animals just can't experience. No other created thing is able to do. You and I experience anger. We experience mercy and compassion. We experience love and hate and many, many other emotions. And again, those are not things that we see in the world of all the other creatures that God has created. You say, well, I've seen some mad animals. Well, there's a reason for that. You understand the reaction of those creatures and why they're reacting. It's because of something that is bothered them, has irritated them in some way that has created that reaction, but it's not the same as the emotions that we feel. We have a very unique capacity because of this to worship, to love each other, to have fellowship and friendship with each other, to want to share in some of those emotional experiences with somebody else. And again, that's something unique to you and me, something that we get from our Creator. Man has an inherent religious inclination. Every single society in the history of mankind, it doesn't matter if it's a primitive society in some forest in South America, or if it is some advanced society in the biggest cities in the world, every society has sought to worship a higher being. And we see this all throughout history. Even when man has moved away from worshiping the one true God, they will then begin to worship anything and everything else that they have determined is a higher being than themselves. And so, therefore, we have all of the gods that we see, even read about in Scripture, the false gods that the Romans, the Egyptians, the Greeks, all of their gods. There is a desire within us that God placed within us to worship and to acknowledge those that are greater than us. I believe that's something by design that God placed there so that we would search Him out and try to understand Him better. Romans 1 and verse 20 tells us that everything that He created in the world, He put there for a reason so that we would know Him, so that we could find Him. All I have to do is look out at the world He created and see the evidence of the design that He put there to know that He's there. But yet man, instead of looking at those trees across the road over there and seeing the design of the Creator behind those trees, many of them sometimes would just start worshiping those trees or a rock. Or man sometimes even then will begin to worship himself. But man has within himself a God-placed desire to worship. Man possesses an immortal soul. Oh, I put that last point in there. Did you see that? No chimpanzee or dog ever built an altar. Never bowed down to pray, because that was not placed and designed within them. Man possesses an immortal soul. No animal is ever described in Scripture as God having given them a spirit of some kind that is going to return to Him one day. But you and I have. Many times in Scripture, describing the soul, the spirit, the heart of man. And that's why Jesus, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, we see Him emphasizing over and over and over again, it's what's going on the inside. It's not just the actions on the outside. Because those that Jesus was talking about, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and those Jews, they were praying prayers. They were giving. They were fasting. But their heart was a long way from God. And so there is an importance that God places on what's inside us. Again, nowhere do we see any evidence, do we see anything described that God designed any other creature with a soul other than you and me as human beings. One of the final things that I want to bring out about this, but I think it's one that really makes a strong point, is the fact that God has given us dominion over all other creatures. Only us. He made everything else, and then He placed us over them. We see this in Genesis chapter 1. Just following this, God had just said, I'm going to make man in my image. And immediately after that, He says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. There was something that God placed us in a position dominance and authority over all the rest of creation. You see, that's the image of God. God is the one who is in authority. He is the one who is in power, in dominion over everything else. And so he gave us a little bit of himself. We see this again, and the emphasis, this is after the flood. It's in Genesis chapter 9. In Genesis chapter 9, beginning in verse 2, it says, "The fear of you and the terror of you will be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the sky, with everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are given. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you, as I gave the green plant. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood." So here in these verses, we see this authority that God gives human beings over all other living things. And he even says to the point that you are allowed to kill them and eat them. Well, that's a lot different than what he says in the next two verses. In verses 5 and 6, he says this, "Surely I will require your lifeblood from every beast, and I will require it. And from every man's brother, I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man." So there's a distinction that's made here. God says, you have every right to go out and kill and eat any of these creatures that are out there. But I made you different. I made man different. And he even says it at the end of this verse. He repeats the reason why it is a sin, the reason why it is wrong, the reason why God will take vengeance on anyone who kills another one of his creation that is made in his image is because of that very thing, because I made them in my image. You're different. You're special. There's something about you that I didn't place in anything else. Man, in a lot of ways, is like the animals in many respects in the physical world, but people are like God in many respects related to the spiritual world. There's a difference, and the reason for that is because we are made in his image. I think that, to me, sums up what that means. Again, picture us standing in front of a mirror and God saying, can you see me? Can you see who I am in what I've created? I made you in my image. Which that one thing should help any human being. No matter what their culture has told them about themselves, no matter what their friends have said about them, no matter how bad of maybe a life they had at home growing up. Maybe they didn't have parents who were encouraging but maybe demeaning and telling them that they weren't worth anything. Maybe they've had coaches or teachers or others in their life who've told them that they're worthless, that they're not going to make anything. Every single human being that stands in front of that mirror and looks at themselves is able to look and say, I am made special because I am made in the image of God. And no one can take that from me. That alone, I think that might be a message that a lot of people in our world today need to hear. Maybe that can be something that some of those that are the most downtrodden, and give them a little bit of hope. Not only what God can do for them through Jesus Christ and salvation, but just letting them know you are special because you're made in the image of God. What about you tonight? Do you believe you're special? That's hard. That's hard to say about yourself sometimes, isn't it? Maybe it's something we need to practice. Again, look in that mirror and don't say you're special, but look at yourself in the eyes and say, I am special. I think there's power in knowing that and understanding that. If there's someone here this evening and there's a challenge, there's a struggle, maybe there's a struggle in saying that. Sometimes that's because I know there's things in my life that are not the way they need to be. If you knew me, I don't know that you would call me special. Well, that can change. And you can begin again, brand new, right now, by bringing it to God. The God who created you in His image, who wants you to come back to Him. If there's anything at all that we can encourage or pray for or help you with, would you let us know?